Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Pensions Subcommittee and Board. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you are not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting, so we can keep track of whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. When referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. We have several important reports to consider today, and I always love this, and I anticipate we will deal with the business in our usual efficient manner. That sounds very optimistic. Right, Tracy, we got the settlement apologies.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members.
For the committee.
For the subcommittee, we've got 8 members present in total, 3 members present in Council HQ in person, being the Chair, the Vice Chair and Councillor Thompson, and 5 members present on Microsoft Teams, being Councillor John Campbell, Councillor Dorward, Councillor Dybra, Councillor McGregor, Councillor McFarlane, and we've currently got 3 vacancies on the pension sub-chair.
Thank you, and I give my approval to remote participation of the pension subcommittee. Settlement apologies for the pension board.
Chair, we've got 4 members present in total, 2 present in person, being Tony Beretti and Moira Weatherup, and 2 present on Teams, being Maureen Johnston and Keith Walters. 3 apologies, and not present at the start is David Stainthorpe.
Thank you, and I also give my approval for remote participation. Do we have any declarations of interest for the pension subcommittee? No. Declarations of interest from the pensions board? No. Thank you. So, minutes for the previous joint meeting of the pensions subcommittee and board, are we happy to approve? You want to come in, Moira?
It was just in relation to item 5. I beg your pardon, I'm on the wrong paper. It's further back, it's item 9, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we're happy to approve the minutes then? Yep. It's approved. Ivor. Tony, are you going to second them?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to... I've got 2 sets of minutes here. I've got the 22nd of June. Minutes of previous meeting of pensions subcommittee on 22nd of June. So we had the subcommittee and board on 22nd. Now we've got the subcommittee on the 22nd. Do we have approval for that, or is that the one you wanted to come in on, Moira? No. So we have approval for those as well? Yep, thank you. Approved by Councillor Hislop, seconded by Councillor Beretti. Item 7, Dumfries and Galloway Pension Fund Unaudited Annual Accounts 2022-23. This report provides members with the audit report from Audit Scotland, the pension fund external auditors on the 2022-23 financial statement. The report highlights that Audit Scotland intend to issue an unmodified audit opinion, and they believe the accounts have been prepared in accordance with law and relevant accounting codes of practice and provide a true and fair view of the pension fund's year-end position. The final audited version of the accounts and letter of representation are appended to the report for members to approve. Fiona Mitchell-Knight, Peter Lindsay and Amy MacDonald from Audit Scotland are here and will provide a brief overview of the report and take any questions that members may have. So, who's going to lead on the report? Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. We're pleased to be here to present to you our conclusions of the audit for the financial year 22-23. And in the papers that you have before you, there are two documents. The first is a covering letter, which summarises our unmodified audit opinion that the Chair has already spoken about there. And that's really good news that we feel that the accounts give a true and fair view, so have been properly prepared in line with financial guidance and regulations. The letter also summarises that there are no unadjusted misstatements in the accounts. So the accounts that you're asked to approve, in our opinion, they, as I say, they give a true and fair view, and there are no uncorrected errors in there. In line with many audits, we found a small number of non-material errors that have been amended and are incorporated into the amended set of accounts. The letter also includes a letter of representation, which is signed by Paul Garrett, Head of Finance and Procurement, and it provides written assurances about the approach that has been taken in complying with the accounting standards in preparing the accounts. And it's just one of the parts of the audit jigsaw that puts together all the evidence that enables us to give that unmodified opinion for you today. So that's the covering letter. But it's also accompanied by our annual audit report, and I'll just take a few moments to go through the key messages of that report, which are on page 35 of your papers. So the first section refers to our audit of the annual accounts, and as we've already described, an unmodified or an unqualified audit opinion, and that's not something that should be taken for granted. You know, it's really important that you get that opinion on your accounts, a really positive assurance there. Our audit, though, goes beyond the audit of the accounts, and the Code of Audit Practice under which we were appointed for 5-year audit appointment requires us to apply what we call a wider scope audit to pension funds across Scotland. And we're required to provide annual commentary on financial management, financial sustainability of the fund, and aspects of vision, leadership and the governance arrangements in the fund. And we also look at how resources are being used to improve the outcomes and the strategic priorities of the fund. So a wider scope audit than you might have been used to in the past. So I'll just reflect on what we've said in our report about that. So in terms of financial management, pleased to say that we've concluded that effective financial management arrangements are in place. We reflect on the financial position at the end of March 2023, and we make commentary that the fund pays out more than it collects annually from the fund members. We also reflect on the investment performance being below the benchmark return set for the year. But it's obviously been a challenging time for pension funds and a lot of unknowns and market volatility which have led to those positions. But looking forward, our conclusions on financial sustainability, very importantly for you, are that we have no concerns about the financial sustainability of the fund or the viability of the funding strategy. So your last full triennial valuation was in 2020, and that reported on a 92% funded position for the fund. But this year the actuary has confirmed that the funding position is likely to be higher when your next triennial valuation results come through, and that's part of the 2023-24 audit that will get picked up on. So as I say, we've no concerns about the financial sustainability. On the following page, page 36, we reflect on the governance arrangements for the fund, and we conclude that the arrangements are adequate to support good governance and accountability and scrutiny of decision making. We do make a few recommendations where we think, however, that those arrangements could be strengthened, and one of those is that we feel that a model constitution could be developed and put in place for the pension subcommittee to be really clear about the role and remit of the committee. We also have made a few more recommendations around governance in our action plan. One is about clarification of the custodian role that is currently carried out by the Finance Officer, Treasury and Pensions, and we don't have any concerns with that, but that role is not formally documented, and in many other pension funds it's a separate role, so that's not a concern for us, but it should be formally recognised. We also make recommendations about the Pension Fund Committee considering internal control reports that are relevant to the pension fund, both in terms of from the fund managers and from internal audit. And when those reports contain relevant information on the pension fund, we think it might be appropriate for this committee to consider those findings. What I would say, though, is that having looked at those reports ourselves, there's nothing in there that is a concern. So it's not an issue in terms of there have been weaknesses that you don't know about, but that it should be more formalised, your consideration of those reports going forward. And our final recommendations around governance arrangements is a recommendation for there to be a risk register for the pension fund. There is a risk register for the council that is designed to reflect on risks for the pension fund, but there are no specific monitoring of pension fund risks through a formal risk register. So those are the recommendations we've made in the report. We're pleased to say that management has accepted those recommendations and will be working with them, and we will report progress on those next year. So going back to the key messages, we reflect that the fund is conducting its business in an open and transparent manner, and there are arrangements in place to detect fraud and corruption and to ensure compliance with pension regulator code and indeed any other pensions regulations. Our final section that we commented on is the use of resources to improve outcomes. So this is where we look at the performance of the fund, and we reflect on performance compared with other funds across Scotland, and putting that in the context of the position across Scotland and more widely pension funds. And we say that the total fund performance over the last 12 months was worse than targeted. However, only 3 of the 9 investment portfolios performed below benchmark. Investment performance above benchmark returns over the last 3 years has been above benchmark, but performance over the last 5 years, and as I say, the last 12 months has been below benchmark, so sort of a mixed picture. So that's something, again, that we'll continue to report on throughout our audit appointment. We make some reflection on the fund administration, and we report there that administration performance indicators are above target for key performance indicators. And it is a challenging time for fund administration. For instance, implementation of the remedies to fix the unlawful discrimination cases that are impacting on pension schemes, and the complicated inquiries that are now very much part of the pension administrators' lives. But we notice there the rollout of the iConnect system will help with that, and has the potential to deliver efficiencies for the fund in the future. And finally, our conclusion is that the administrating authority has appropriate arrangements in place for securing best value at the fund. So all pension funds have responsibilities and duties to deliver on best value in how they're conducting their business, and to be looking at continuous improvement in all that they do. And we're comfortable that the fund is making appropriate arrangements to make sure that is in the case here. So as I say, we have an action plan with our report, and I've reflected already on the actions that are included in that, and that management are taking appropriate responses to our actions. So basically that concludes our audit now, and we're very happy to take any questions anybody might have on our report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that update, and I'd also like to thank you for the work you've put in. It's a very extensive audit, and I welcome the recommendations, but thank you very much for the hard work that you've clearly put into this. So thank you very much. If there's any questions from anyone, Councillor Beretti?
Yeah, I was just going to second what you've said about the report and the amount of work that's gone into it, Chair. I'd just like to ask a question, page 43, where it talks about the fund and we're having to pay from, but more is coming out than going in. How do you see that going forward in terms of years of sustainability to do that, given, I know you've already alluded to some of the market pressures that we're under and ongoing, and no one knows the reality of how many years these pressures are going to stay there and impact on all financial investments, and in light of any political uncertainty which we might have vis-a-vis either United Kingdom or globally.
Yes, so I think obviously the fact that the pension funds are required to have a regular revaluation of the fund and to review contribution rates in response to what those valuations find is the way that the pension funds ensure the ongoing financial sustainability. So, we welcome the fact that there's a triennial revaluation. The results will be coming out of that. And then the contribution rates will be reviewed to ensure the future sustainability of the fund depending on the results of that. So we're comfortable that arrangements are in place to secure the longer term sustainability of the fund and to be able to pay out the liabilities to the fund members as they arise on an annual basis. So we're not concerned about that. Thank you.
Tony?
And the other part of that question, the political uncertainty, global scenario.
So in terms of, yes, political uncertainty and market volatility, and that is something that will be reflected as best they can in the triennial revaluation results by the actuaries.
You happy with that, Tony?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Councillor John Campbell?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Excuse me, my voice is, I think it's on the way out, so that'll probably please a number of people. However, I welcome the report. It's very comprehensive, and in particular the action plan, which was touched on earlier. On page 66, Appendix 1, you got the Pension Subcommittee Constitution, which I think, would probably benefit the subcommittee. I'm very much aware that further on in the agenda, I think it's agenda item 9, we have the review of the Pensions Committee and Board roles, governance and responsibilities. I'm just wondering, and it may be a question, Chair, for Paul, that when we get to such that particular item, that we could maybe get some recommendations in there of taking some of these action plan recommendations forward. Thank you, Chair.
Paul, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, just to say that the actions reflected in the action plan are consistent with the exercise we're seeking to undertake through the review of the roles and responsibilities of both the Pensions Subcommittee and the Pensions Board. So they're entirely consistent, John, but happy to reflect that when we come to that later item.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Paul.
Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was along the same lines, just that little section on the action plan from page 66. And then it does have the sort of dates associated with the actions. So obviously we're taking one today just in relation to what Councillor Campbell's just spoken about. But I did wonder, in terms of the last action, internal audit, that these reports will come presumably from today onwards. I presume that's the kind of action and that's what we will be doing in future.
And that's very much what I'd like to see. It actually makes complete sense to me that if we have a report going to the audit committee, audit and risk, and it relates to pensions, that we get to see it. It makes perfect sense. Stephen? Yeah, and I think just the comment about the model constitution, if you like, and that separate risk register, I think maybe formalises that
distinctness between the pension fund and the council, even though obviously the council is the administering authority in that regard. That's helpful as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Walters?
Just a couple of questions on clarification on page 51. On the Exhibit 5 member transactions, one very stupid question is to why are the contributions shown as in brackets and the pension paid out as in a positive? I would have thought it'd be the other way around if you're talking about the pension pot, but that's perhaps a technical question. And then the second one is, do they have any concerns about the fact that the management expenses, which are at a fairly constant level in 2020, 21, 22, seem to have leapt up a fair bit? That's two questions.
Thank you, Keith. Can anybody tackle that?
I'll answer that one, the first question anyway. It's effectively the contributions are credits, so we would put them in brackets, and the payments out are debits. So it's just really accounting speak. Apologies.
In terms of the increase in management expenses, what I would say is actually that the increase is not that significant in terms of money and in terms of percentage increase. So that's not something that we're concerned about in any way, and would have been covered as part of our audit. As I say, we're comfortable with the figures that appear in the accounts there. Paul, I don't know if you've anything to say.
Yep. Just to say, as Fiona says, in terms of the size of the fund in comparison to other funds, the level of management fees is still not that significant and lower than most. However, as you've identified there, Councillor Beretti, it is a material increase. Oh, sorry, I thought I was looking at Tony there. Sorry.
I'll take the credit if it's going fine. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Walters. As you've identified, it has gone up by a fair percentage over the last year. That's to do with our approach to investment, as agreed through the committee. But it's something we're always continually focused on, trying to make sure that our management expenses are kept at a reasonable level. So it's something that will be picked up through the regular monitoring to the committee, and if there's any further issues or changes that need to be brought to members' attention, we'll make sure we do that through those reports.
Councillor Walters, are you happy with that?
Yes, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Paul, and I forgive you for mistaking me for Councillor Beretti. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. As someone that spent a number of my formative years at wrestling with double entry bookkeeping, I can understand why people could actually get muddled up. Councillor Beretti.
I'll let Councillor Walters take the credit for this one then if he wants. Page 66 in relation to Councillor Campbell's comments about the Pension Subcommittee, and one of the things that the Pension Subcommittee have highlighted is effectively we need a secretary to liaise between the two groups. Can that be seen to be established within this constitution? That's okay, Keith, you want to take the credit?
Paul?
I think in terms of that issue, it seems reasonable. It's certainly something we'll take into account as part of the review. I wouldn't want to take any decisions today because I think as we're highlighting further on the agenda, we need to make sure we undertake a thorough review to make sure that the way things are set up for both the board and the committee going forward best serve the needs of the funds. But it sounds reasonable and happy to take that into account as part of that wider review.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Nope. Oh, Moira.
I was just interested in relation to the risk register, what the frequency of that being brought back to the pension subcommittee will be. Do we envisage that being quarterly, or will it be, every 6 months or every year? What's the usual?
You got any thoughts on that, Paul?
At this stage, I don't think we've actually set out the regularity of the report. We'll probably take external audit advice on that, but I don't know, Karen, if you've got any further information.
I think the plan initially was obviously to develop it in advance of preparing the annual accounts for next financial year. I think I've said in the management response in the papers that we'll review it at least annually as a minimum, but if we felt that there was material changes to the risk register, we could bring it forward more regularly than that. So we're open to suggestions. Once the committee formally agree that the first sort of version of the risk register for the pension fund, we can determine the appropriate length or frequency of review, but I would say as a minimum annually.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, we'll move on to the recommendations. 2.1, receive the external auditor's report on the 2022-23 audit as detailed at Appendix 2. Well, we've certainly done that. 2.2, approve the letter of representation to be certified by the Head of Finance and Procurement appended to the audit report as detailed at Appendix 1 and Appendix B. Are we happy to agree that? Thank you. 2.3, approve the audited accounts which will be certified by the Head of Finance and Procurement and Audit Scotland after this meeting as detailed at Appendix 3. Are we happy to do that? 2.4, note that the certified accounts will be made available to all members by 31st of October 2023 when they will be available on the Council website. So happy to note. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 8, Local Government Pension Scheme Administration Annual Update. This report provides an update on the activity carried out by the Pensions Administration team in the financial year 2022-23. This is an annual report received by the subcommittee, and Stuart Clanahan, Human Resources Manager, is available to take any questions. Morning, Stuart.
Morning, Chair.
Do we have any questions? No, it looks like you're getting off light, Stuart. No, nobody's raised their hands, so we don't seem to have any questions on that. So we can just move on to the recommendations for that. Thank you. So we got nothing. There's a wee bit of a disconnect here between what I've got on my iPad and what I've got on the paper. So we're just asked to note the annual report on local government pension scheme activity for financial year 2022-23 in accordance with Regulation 57 of the Local Government Pension Schemes Scotland Regulations 2018. So we're happy to do that. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Now we'll move on to the review of Pension Subcommittee and Pension Board roles, governance and responsibility. This report is a follow-up to discussions at the June meeting of the Subcommittee and Board regarding the respective roles, governance and responsibilities of the Pensions Subcommittee and Pensions Board. This initial report aims to provide clarity on the current role and remit of each body and recommends that a more comprehensive review is undertaken to ensure that the arrangements in place effectively support the progression of the business of the Dumfries and Galloway Pension Fund going forward. It is also recommended that the output of this review and the proposed government's document is subject to a members' seminar to allow for a full discussion and consultation prior to being formally considered by the committee and board at a future meeting. I will now open the floor to questions. Officers from both finance and governance are here to take any questions. Councillor Beretti.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Now, given we've just referenced in previous items about the subcommittee and potential role that we could have as a secretary, on page 176, where point 410, we're not happy with the wording of bullet point 2, which tends to suggest that we were acting beyond our scope. We've said we expanded quite a few words in our previous meeting to try and tease this out, and we don't think that was a fair reflection of what we were trying to do, but given in light of what we've been saying, that the roles and responsibilities of the Pension Sub-Board and why we need to look at it, and we think it shouldn't be as, I would also say, damning, but it does actually say we are a scrutiny body, and it has to be reflected as such. I don't know how more I want to say. If anyone else would want to come in from the pension subcommittee, that would do that. But I think that bullet point needs to be reworded.
Thank you, Councillor Beretti. And if nothing else, it does actually highlight the fact that we need this review as much as anything else. Paul?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair, and apologies, Councillor Beretti, in terms of that word. And it was in no way intended to be damning or anything along those lines. It basically was a reflection of our understanding from the research in terms of how things have operated across Scotland and previously here as well in relation to work between subcommittees and pensions boards. But as the Chair highlights, there's nothing in this report that says this is what needs to happen going forward. What we're recognising is that the issues raised by the board are significant, and it's appropriate that they are thoroughly reviewed. And what we've really set out in the report is, rather than come back with a set of recommendations that may have been difficult or challenging to discuss in a committee meeting, that through a member seminar there's more opportunity for that sharing of information, sharing of views, and hopefully come to a kind of shared view between the committee and the board in terms of how things should work going forward. So apologise if I can understand, how it's been taken. It absolutely was not the intent, but we'll make sure we thoroughly review and take into account the concerns of the board when we're doing this piece of work going forward.
Councillor Beretti?
That's a reasonable response. In a sense, it's to highlight the fact that inescapable elected members on this subcommittee are now 2 new members, and therefore we're trying to get our feet under the table to understand what this committee does. And going forward, it's likely that this particular type of committee will see new members come in with exactly the same problems, that they don't understand their role and they are unable to know how far they can flex their muscles or their knowledge to question. Because for me personally, scrutiny has to be the principal aim of our committee. How we get to that point should be governed by, yes, the officers, and yes, the pension board, but also legislation. So I welcome the fact that we may be able to draw up a constitution, but also the relevance of the secretary does seem to indicate that we do need to both have training, work together, but also give us more space prior to meetings, as today was quite an example where having personally taken the chair and personally wanting to drink several vodkas afterwards, I find that it's an awful lot of work for someone who's coming in and trying to get his head around a complex and expensive industry. We're not talking pennies and pounds, we're talking hundreds of millions of pounds. So we need to be confident in our ability and our remit to do the job that we are being tasked to do.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor John Campbell?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. Yeah, it's just referring back to the previous agenda report and the audit, and the recommendations for agenda item 9. I don't know if it needs a wording change to incorporate the appendix from the previous report, the recommendations, or at least have it recorded that we are taking these recommendations forward as an action. Thanks, Chair.
I think it's probably coming as an action from the previous item, but Paul, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, happy to kind of take advice in terms of specific changes to the wording, but I think what I'm trying to say recommendation 2.2 in this report is the overall arrangements for the operation of both the board and the subcommittee will be part of that overall review. The constitution, which was referred to in the earlier audit item, is obviously part of those wider arrangements. So I'm happy for it to be more specific if that would be helpful, but certainly it is the intent that the constitutions will be reviewed as part of this particular exercise referred to item 9.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's just a case of getting it recorded as an action. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll do, John. We will actually record it as an action. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. So I think Paul touched on it there, but listening to Councillor Beretti, I think there is something about the relationship between the board and the subcommittee, and I'm conscious the board has a constitution. Working out what the relationship is before the pension subcommittee has a sort of constitution seems putting the cart before the horse a wee bit, because it seems you wouldn't reverse engineer the role of this committee based on the relationship and then figure, oh, this is what the constitution is. So normally you would set out and clarify what you stand for, etc., what you don't stand, all that kind of thing, and then, okay, what's the relationship between the two, and how does one oversee the other, and how does the other one fulfil its function, or whatever that might be. So I think the actions with the timescales, maybe in the recommendations from the audit recommendations, might be a helpful structure to how we go forward in terms of the seminar or whatever arrangement we have to actually get these ideas fleshed out, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So, if I'm right, what is the timescale for this constitution, Paul?
I have to admit, I'm not sure we've actually set up the kind of seminar yet for the kind of further discussion, but in advance of that, obviously, we'd be looking to provide members with information on current arrangements, current constitution, and the issues we want to discuss through that seminar. I think I'm right in saying that we haven't actually set up the seminar yet.
No, we are sort of consulting with the council diary at the moment, both for a seminar to cover this and the manager selection process that will get to later on in the agenda. We're sort of struggling for time. We're hoping that we could get it back through in advance of the December meeting of the subcommittee and board, but the council diary is looking quite challenging, so it may be that it'll have to be early in the new year, but we are working on options for that at the moment. So we'll try and do it as soon as we can.
Councillor Thompson, do you want to come back in on that? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just picking up on your point that actually before we do anything really, we need to have this constitution in place so that we actually have some form of structure for going forward for the committee. That's maybe me being very naive, Chair, but it just seems that you would put step 1 first and then do step 2, and step 1 seems to be, well, just formalise or establish what the constitution is. And obviously you could review that presumably as time goes on if you deem it to be not fit for changing needs or whatever, but it would seem appropriate, and take the first steps carefully, and then you can proceed with greater pace rather than let's try and cram it in now and then wonder what we did wrong later on. So thank you. That's exactly what I picked up on. I thought, Paul.
Yep, I think the deadline for the action in relation to the constitution is December, as reflected in the audit report. So I think it is important that comes back to this committee. I'm hopeful that we may get the seminar in advance of that, so we could have a draft constitution that could be taken into account as part of that work. But I think, as you suggested, if we agree the revised constitution in December, but then take that into account as part of the review, if it is post that date, and if it gets adjusted as part of that further review exercise, we could take that into account at that stage. But certainly in line with the deadline reflected in the audit report, we'll look to come back to this committee with the revised constitution at the December meeting.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? Tony, you look like you're poised.
Yeah, I like it when they said, looking at the elected members' diaries and so on and so forth, and I'm thinking, right, where are they going to find a spot? I would like to see this review being done as quickly as possible, because it will just drag it out and make it even more difficult to work going forward. And none of us know what's going to happen next year. I'm not even going to predict a meteor strike on this planet, but we can't rule out the fact that something else could happen that will take our time away.
Thank you. I picked that up. There is a need for urgency going forward, but is there any further questions? No. We'll move on to the recommendations. 2.1. Note the current agreed roles and responsibilities of the Pension Subcommittee and Pension Board as detailed at paragraphs 4.1 to 4.7. And 2.2. Agree that a more comprehensive review of these roles and responsibilities is required to ensure that the concerns raised by the Pension Board are appropriately addressed and that the arrangements within Dumfries and Galloway, including any revisions to these arrangements associated with this review, are fit for purpose to effectively support the progression of the business of the Dumfries and Galloway Pension Fund going forward. So we're happy to do that. Yeah, thank you. So now we move on to the Pension Fund update and emerging issues. This standing agenda item provides an update to members on the current and emerging issues relevant to the Pension Fund. This report draws members' attention to the initial work that has been carried out to support the triennial evaluation and that Hymans Robertson, the Fund's actuary, will attend the December meeting to provide an overview of the process and present the whole Fund results. The report also provides an update regarding the Lothbury Property Trust as requested at the June meeting. Lothbury are still looking for investors to withdraw the redemption requests. Based on plans very similar to that presented to this committee and board in June, Hymans Robertson's advice remains that we should withdraw our full allocation from Lothbury Property Trust. I will pass over to Karen Donaldson, not in the first instance actually, I'm going to pass over to Paul Garrett in the first instance for an update, but we'll then pass over to Karen. There was some further developments in relation to Lothbury since the paper was published. So, Paul?
Thanks, Chair. It was just to give members an update on a specific issue in relation to the actuarial valuation. There is a section in this paper that refers to this fund's valuation, and we are intending bringing the initial results from that to the December meeting of the committee and board. But you may be aware that Strathclyde Pension Fund are a bit ahead of other Scottish funds in that process at the minute, and they took a report to their committee last week with the initial results. It got a bit of a media attention, both in relation to the funding level and the approach to employer contributions going forward. So the kind of headlines from that is that the funding level at the Strathclyde Fund, which is the biggest fund in Scotland, including 11 different local authorities, the overall funding level has increased from 106% at the last valuation to 147% this time around. I think the main reasons for that is the increase in interest rates, which has discounted the level of future pension liabilities. There's also assumptions in relation to investment returns as well. I think an improvement in funding level is expected across all funds. I think the extent of it's fairly significant. I think probably the bigger issue and the one that's maybe hit the headlines is the approach to employer contributions that's being taken at the minute. They've identified through this valuation that the long-term funding level required for the Strathclyde employers has fallen from 19.3% to 17.5%. Their intention is to move to that in 3 years' time, but in the interim period, for a 2-year period, they're going to significantly reduce employer contribution rates to 6.5%. So that's something that's very significant both for the funds and for the contributing employers, including the councils. I think it's important to highlight that all funds are different. There'll be different assumptions, different levels of prudence reflected in their valuations. In terms of our own fund, we were 92% funded at the last valuation. We'd expect an improvement of that. I think we're expecting, and we've not got initial figures yet, but expecting to move into a surplus position. But it will not be at the 147% level or anything like that, I wouldn't expect. But I think probably the more important thing to highlight is the approach we'll take to employer contribution rates. That I think the fundamental approach or the fundamental principles that we're taking into account in terms of assessing the results and how we use those going forward, it'll be in line with the already agreed funding strategy statement, and that will be to seek to secure the long-term solvency of the fund in terms of meeting future pensions commitments, but also seeking to ensure stability for all employers to the fund, including the council. We're already in what we call a stabilisation mechanism, which looks to make sure that employers don't get shocks either way. Each valuation will look to continue to follow that as part of this process. So it's really just to highlight this issue for members and just to give some assurance in terms of the approach we'll take to the results when they're received for the Dumfries and Galloway Fund. Obviously, we'll have a bit fuller information on that to the next meeting of the committee once we've had the initial results from the actuaries. Happy to answer any questions in relation to that, if there's any, Chair. Thanks.
Any questions on that point? No. Councillor Hislop.
I noticed within the was it the auditor's report, Exhibit 3, one of the tables, it showed 104% funded. Is that just an estimate at this time? Because we're still waiting on the triennial report coming back. Is it a good estimate, or is it something that might see us exceed that figure? And if it's at that sort of level, it sort of suggests that we're just ticking over, because Conservative with a small c this time, just worried about, this year it's that. Councillor Barretti mentioned that it's volatile that we're in just now. So next year it might, although it was at the triennial valuation 104 or whatever, it might come down again. So is that 104 a good guess, or is it just finger in the air?
Yeah, the latter half of paragraph 34 explains it's not directly comparable. This is the estimate provided by the actuary just in the 2022-23 IAS 19 update, so it's not directly comparable.
Yep, no, as Peter says, it's a different set of valuations and assumptions that are used for accounting. Estimates as are used in the triennial valuation. But just to pick up on Councillor Hislop's point, it's really important that these valuation levels are at a point in time. They are volatile and will move with changes in assumptions. As we've said, the movement in interest rates has been the main factor in the current positions. So it is important when we look at our approach to employer contributions and the overall funding of the pension fund, that we do recognise that and take a longer term view going forward. And that's something we'll take into account when we come back to the committee in December.
Karen, do you want to come in on the Lothbury update?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a brief update. Following the release of the papers, Lothbury last week called an all investors meeting at fairly short notice. Both like myself and Ross and colleagues from Hymans attended that meeting. Obviously I said in the papers that they were still intending to try and operate going forward with a sort of smaller fund at about half a £1 billion mark. And they were asking all investors to consider withdrawing their redemption requests. They've not got anywhere near that level at the moment, and they were sort of looking at options around operating an even smaller fund at probably about £300 million mark, or the potential of merging with another fund manager, and whether any investors would be willing to look at that. There was probably fair to say a lot of concern about those suggestions, but in the sort of willingness of fully considering them, it was agreed that a small working group would be set up to fully analyse their Lothbury's proposals, and obviously that will include sort of the research team from Hymans, Robertson, they'll be sort of acting on the pension fund's our behalf with regards to that working group. But certainly from my take of that meeting, there didn't seem to be huge appetite in withdrawing the redemption request, so we're not expecting any material movement, but it was just important to highlight that there are still conversations ongoing, and I think Lothbury are trying very hard to sort of provide some future for the fund, but it's looking as if it's going to be particularly challenging for them. I don't know, Ian, if you've got anything else from your colleagues' feedback on that meeting, or...
Yeah, I think I'll touch on it a bit more maybe in later item in the next section of the meeting, but as Karen said, very little progress in trying to convince the current investors to change their mind. The strategy presented hasn't, as it's evolved, still hasn't really convinced anyone. There's still a huge amount of uncertainty, so I just think based on the information we have now, the best course of action is to remain in the queue, remain waiting for our redemptions to come back. There's been no obvious reason to change that. And then that buys us time to keep monitoring the situation and see if there is an opportunity, because if they do manage to merge with another big UK pension, UK property fund, that would have the potential advantage of avoiding the transaction costs of having to disinvest that money. So that would be good, and it's something we need to consider. But there's still so much uncertainty that there's no reason that we should think that's going to happen and come out of the queue. So it's still a watch this space.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, obviously this is a wee bit more detail and it's in the report, I suppose, but I just wondered, I mean, a lot of the discussion and decision we've taken around this was in an exempt item previously. And I'm just sort of thinking, are we, hopefully, we're not sort of revealing details out of school sort of thing in terms of the discussions that have maybe been happening in a private forum with investors and that type of thing in the public forum, because we're not quite in the exempt bit yet. So I just sort of wondered, we're fine with that though. It's just to check that we're not sort of breaching any confidences. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a bit of reassurance on that, Paul?
Yep, I don't think anything that's been said so far would give us any difficulties in that sense, but it's a good point, and we'll take that into account as part of the kind of ongoing discussions. Obviously, the purpose of this report is just to give an update on the current position, but if we get any kind of further details, we would take that into account.
No, thanks for the reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we any further questions? Councillor Beretti.
I don't know how you managed to read my mind. I'm just seeing that this, in fact, is listening to this is, in fact, part of the scrutiny and understanding the ins and outs and the reflection of the uncertainty of the market. And I think we actually did say at the time, going back quite a few months, that this market was an unstable and uncertain market. So, yes, no, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we've got no further questions or comments, we'll move on to the recommendations. So we're asked at 2.1 to note the update in relation to the implementation of the agreed investment strategy as detailed at paragraphs 4.1 to 4.4. Happy to note. 2.2, note the current and emerging issues that will impact on the pension fund as detailed at paragraphs 4.5 to 4.12. And 2.3, that further updates on these issues will be brought to future meetings of this subcommittee and board as required. So we're happy to note and accept another report. Thank you. Item 11, annual training plan. This is a standing item on the agenda and details the 2023-24 training plan. There has been limited training available over the last quarter. However, there are 2 events scheduled over the next few weeks. Members are reminded to get in touch with Ross if they would like to attend these training events. I'll open the floor to any questions. Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. And I know that Ross sent an email out about the training event on the 28th or 29th of October, which I think is next week. However, some of us have got the COSLA convention to go to up in Crieff, so I'm just wondering if there's any alternative dates for that.
Ross, have you got any alternatives?
Unfortunately not in this instance. That is an external event that's run by the local government Chronicle, so the dates are set by them, and unfortunately there's no other alternative.
Thank you, Ross. Are there any further questions? Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, just I suppose following on from concerns probably rightly raised by the board earlier, but the guide that's due to be issued for people who've been on the board for 3 months, I think it is. I'm just conscious there's quite a few on the board maybe haven't had that, and I'm just mindful of the fact that it's maybe quite a lot to take on in terms of the amount of money available and the sort of calls for secretaries, etc. Maybe that information could be expedited for board members so that they're fully informed. And it's under the mandatory column as well, so I'm just sort of thinking maybe that would be helpful for board members to feel a bit more confident in their role. Thank you.
Is it on the same subject, Councillor Beretti?
I'm not entirely certain. I did see this email come in, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, Chair, and at the time I wasn't quite certain whether or not I could see why I would probably need to go, and as just been mentioned, it's more to do with training. But I think with the volume of work that some of us elected members have, it is impossible to commit, even though it may well be a very necessary step for that training and understanding of the pensions. And it would just be possibly a pity that it's come very late in the day. If it had come maybe, say, 2 months ago or 6 weeks ago, it would have been easier to try and plan around it, because we have got, and I have got other, quite important commitments around that period.
Thank you. Ross, do you want to make any comment on that?
I can only apologise, but the emails that I send out regarding training are sent out as quickly as I receive them. So if you're making reference to the LGC conference that Councillor Dryborough was mentioning, that one was sent out as soon as I got the email, and unfortunately, as I've already said, the dates are set in stone by the organisers of that conference, and we can't move them.
And as to Councillor Thompson's comments about the board.
In reference to the guide, I can reissue that to all members of the committee and the board. I'll just issue it to everyone so that everyone's got it.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. That'd be quite helpful. Tony?
Yeah, having repeating that I'm almost new to this particular scrutiny and committee. It would be useful to know, if these are annual events, it would be useful to know roughly when these annual events are coming through, so that we've got sight of them at least 12 months in advance. I mean, I know Easter's going to come around every 12 months, so I can prepare. So these are the sort of things that we can prepare for, and clearly, as elected members, we all have the experience of where we think we're going into a week with an agenda, and then all of a sudden we find someone asks us, oh, by the way, can you come to a meeting? It's extremely important that you're there because we want your presence. And we have to evaluate that request based on the importance or the severity of the issue that's being asked of us. And I can give you one quick example, if that's okay. I was on my last day of recess, and I was in town and I was going to do something else, and before I'd even got to the council office, I was phoned up by Monty Ives and saying, our monument's been hit. And I had to deal with that, irrespective of the fact that I wasn't actually, I was still on holiday. And these are sort of things that come in all the time, Chair.
Yeah, it is difficult at times to juggle everything, so I think maybe what you're actually asking for is some kind of indicative forward plan, perhaps. Will this be around the end of September, start of October sort of thing, I appreciate, Ross, that you can't actually give exact dates until you receive them, but maybe some sort of indicative training plan.
Yeah, I can take that on board, and when we bring forward next year's training plan, we can include indicative dates, but similarly, it may be that they need to move for venue purposes or other conflicting interests, but yeah, we can put that forward for future training plans.
Thank you. Moira?
It was just as part of that future training plan, I wondered whether we could have a session on the climate-related financial disclosures, which has been highlighted in the external audit report. Just an hour seminar on that would be probably useful.
Who would be Paul? I think that would come down to you, perhaps.
Yep, happy to look into that. I have to admit, we've got a bit of work to do ourselves to get up to speed with the nature of those requirements, so it's something that we could involve members in the board as well as part of that, so we're certainly going to look into that, Moira.
Thank you, Paul. I think the Tories bound to want to say something about the climate stuff.
Incredible chair, picking out my mind again. Yeah, climate is an issue which I think is going to be front and centre for the next 10, 15 years. So everything we do has got to have an optic with that one subject in mind. And I know that we've got a few board members here who are on, climate group. And I think they would all welcome foresight and information and be involved in that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions or comment, we'll move on to the recommendation. We're asked to note the updated record of training and training plan for 2023-24. We're happy to do that. Thank you. Do we have any other business? I don't think we do. So now we'll move on to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 to exclude members of the public and move to our exempt meeting. So we'll take 5 minutes to allow people online to log on to the appropriate meeting. So we'll resume at, was 5 minutes a bit generous? We might make it a bit less. We'll resume at 25 to 12. Thanks.